I was going to think, have I forgotten anything, guys?
Is that all good?
All good? Have I forgotten anything, Dave? All good? I can go? All right. This morning, I want to talk about something that's been on my heart for quite some time, that I believe will benefit everyone here, no matter their age or life situation. My aim in my message today is to unsettle you. And then the next time I preach, I'll try and bring some closure to the process I'm hoping will be kicked off in your heart today. I'm taking a little bit of a risk, but I think it'll be a good one. I want to give you an opportunity to step back from your life at the moment and have a look at it in the context of your whole life and the role that God plays in it. It's my hope that examining the drivers of your life, the beliefs you hold about what will and won't happen to you, will help give you some guidance as to how to best, or what to best to pour your energy and effort in between now and when you die. Because we're all going to die one day, and we have this time on planet Earth to be fruitful. I was going to say and multiply, but you know, we're past that. Now, a book of the Bible that I've been spending a fair bit of time in lately is the book called Ecclesiastes. And it's a fascinating book. It almost seems to have been included in Scripture by mistake because at first glance it's quite pessimistic and a little bit confusing. Even more so when compared with much of the teaching we've experienced from Western evangelical Christianity in the 21st century. According to one commentator, Ecclesiastes forces us to face death and chance and the challenges they pose to a naive belief in God's goodness. The book of Ecclesiastes is the critic's response to Proverbs, he says, which states that we live a good life when we fear God and follow wisdom. Another commentator in his synopsis of Ecclesiastes says, the narrator of Ecclesiastes, referred to as the teacher, believes that life is hevel, temporary and fleeting, like smoke or vapour. Humans, he says, try to build meaning and purpose in life, investing in pursuits and things that have no lasting value, but time marches on, we all die, and bad things happen to good people, leaving us with the question, what's the purpose of it all? And how do we make the most of a bad situation when there's no rhyme or reason and your situation in life is very much left up to luck, and even that is transitory? It's a great book, eh? Now, there are some commentators who believe that the writer of Ecclesiastes is different to the person who's highlighted in it, but that aside, most scholars believe that the teacher referenced is Solomon, who was considered the wisest king that Israel ever had. He was also one of the most wealthy rulers of ancient time and a prolific womanizer with over 700 wives and 300 concubines, which asks the question, how wise was the guy really? All the women are saying he's extremely wise. Now, before you think to yourself, let's just brush over this book and move on to something else, the writer actually does us all a great service, and so he should, after all, according to him. He was the most gifted with, he was gifted with more wisdom than anyone who had come before him in Israel, and he felt it was his duty to apply his wisdom and learning to looking at life and seeing if it made sense. And what he found was quite startling. In his investigation of life, he ends up stripping away a lot of the faulty thinking that many of us wrap our lives in, seeking to protect ourselves from the harsh reality of an unjust world. Most of us have this idea in the back of our heads that there is an underlying justice to the world system that we find ourselves in. And with a little bit of hard work and perseverance, we can do just about anything we set our minds to. Now, it's definitely not our usual experience, and right there should be some alarm bells going off in our heads, but it's what we hold on to unconsciously. Now, if hard work and perseverance led to prosperity, then every woman in Africa would be a multimillionaire and their kids would all be dressed in designer clothing. Now, a lot of people like to cherry pick from Ecclesiastes. They find something in it that they like, and then avoiding all the rest, they hold it up as some sort of badge to prove that they're spiritually edgy. because they're using something from the book that many like to avoid. We're not going to do that this morning. We're going to focus in on the stuff that makes most people feel uncomfortable. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's dive into Ecclesiastes and see what we can learn from it this morning. Now, try not to push back too hard against the writer's dialogue, but rather let his words rattle your cage a little. It's going to be okay in the end, all right? You will be okay. But it's important that you don't let your sense of self-preservation and your beliefs about life and the world rob you of the lesson that Solomon wants you to experience. Now, I purposely put in the word experience rather than learn, because quite often when people approach Solomon, the reason that they have a reaction is because they feel something on the inside. They haven't actually logically thought it through, but they feel something and their emotion takes over. So I want you to experience the words of Solomon today, and then, apply a little bit of thinking to it as well. The writer of Ecclesiastes starts his book on an incredibly low note. If you're looking for a statement that would discourage further reading, then you can't do better than his. He starts off in Ecclesiastes 1, reading from verse 1. These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and then turns north. Around and around it goes. In Hobart, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. Solomon starts off by stating quite emphatically that he thinks all life is meaningless, completely meaningless, hevel, temporary, and fleeting like smoke or vapour. Now, we shouldn't be too surprised by his opening statement, because if you were to remove God and eternity from the equation and look at humankind spread across the face of the earth over the thousands of years of recorded history, we would soon come to the same conclusion. Take your Australian blinkers off, look at the world the way it truly is for the majority of people. Life as we know it is unfair and unjust. As the playwright Tennessee Williams puts it, we all live in a house on fire, no fire department to call, no way out, just the upstairs windows to look out of while the fire burns the house down, with us trapped, locked in it. That's an encouraging thought, isn't it? You're glad you came to church. George Orwell puts it like this: most people get a fair amount of fun out of their lives, but on balance, life is suffering, and only the very young or the very foolish imagine otherwise. Solomon then goes on to lay out his personal credentials and why he's qualified to tackle the subject of the meaning and purpose of life. In Ecclesiastes 1, reading from verse 12, I, the teacher, was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under the heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be made right. What is missing cannot be recovered. I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all this is like chasing the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. It's really quiet here this morning. He then goes on to describe his pursuit of pleasure in the things he had accumulated, and arrived at the conclusion that it was all meaningless. Ecclesiastes 2:11. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. He then goes on and looks at the benefit of wisdom as compared to foolishness, and his conclusion in Ecclesiastes 2, 14 to 16, "Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, since I will end up the same as the fool, what's the value of all my wisdom? This is also meaningless, for the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. In the days to come, both will be forgotten." He then goes and looks at the value of working hard. Where did that lead him to? Ecclesiastes 2, 18 and 20. "I came to hate all my hard work here on earth. For I must leave to others everything I have earned. And who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Yet they will control everything I have gained by my skill and hard work under the sun. How meaningless! So I gave up in despair, questioning the value of all my hard work in this world." And in chapter 3, he talks about the injustices of life. "I also noticed that under the sun there is evil in the courtroom. Yes, even the courts of law are corrupt. I said to myself, in due season God will judge everyone, both good and bad, for all their deeds. I also thought about the human condition, how God proves to people that they are like animals. For people and animals share the same fate. Both breathe and both must die. So people have no real advantage over the animals. How meaningless. Both go to the same place. They came from dust and they return to dust. For who can prove that the human spirit goes up and the spirit of animals go down into the earth?" In chapter 4, he talks about oppression and envy, which he believed drove much of our pursuit of success. "Again, I observed all the oppression that takes place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed with no one to comfort them. The oppressors have great power and their victims are helpless. So I concluded that the dead are better off than the living. But most fortunate of all are those who are not yet born, for they have not seen all the evil that is done under the sun. Then I observed that most people are motivated to success because they envy their neighbours, but this too is meaningless, like chasing the wind." He concludes chapter 4 with a statement about the futility of political power and its fickle nature. In chapter 5, he talks about wealth and its deceptiveness. "Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers?" He goes to a fairly dark place in chapter 6. "A man might have 100 children." I have no idea how, but a man might have 100 children and live to be very old. But if he finds no satisfaction in life and doesn't even get a decent burial, it would have been better for him to have been born dead. His birth would have been meaningless and he would have ended in darkness. He wouldn't have even had a name and he would never have seen the sun or known of its existence. Yet he would have had more peace than in growing up to be an unhappy man. He might live 1,000 years twice over but still not find contentment. And since he must die like everyone else, well, what's the use? All people spend their lives scratching for food, but they never seem to have enough. So are wise people really better off than fools? Do poor people gain anything by being wise and knowing how to act in front of others? Enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Just dreaming about nice things is meaningless, like chasing the wind." He then concludes with, "In the few days of our meaningless lives, who knows how our days can best be spent? Our lives are like a shadow. Who can tell what will happen on this earth after we are gone?" Then in chapter 7, he starts by giving some words of wisdom about life and then says it's basically folly anyway. Am I right? Yep. He says, "I've always tried my best to let wisdom guide my thoughts and actions. I said to myself, I am determined to be wise. But it didn't work. Wisdom is always distant and difficult to find. I searched everywhere, determined to find wisdom and to understand the reason for things. I was determined to prove to myself that wickedness is stupid and that foolishness is madness." And he concludes in verse 27 and 28, "This is my conclusion," says the teacher. "I discovered this after looking at the matter from every possible angle. Though I have searched repeatedly, I have not found what I was looking for." Chapter 9, he's starting to wind things up as he ponders death. And he says this too I carefully explored, even though the actions of godly and wise people are in God's hands, no one knows whether God will show them favour. The same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, whether righteous or wicked, good or bad, ceremonially clean or unclean, religious or irreligious. Good people receive the same treatment as sinners, and people who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. It seems so wrong that everyone under the sun suffers the same fate. Already twisted by evil, people choose their own mad course, for they have no hope. There is nothing ahead but death anyway. There is hope only for the living. As they say, it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. His conclusion for Ecclesiastes 9, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is your reward for your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well, for when you go to the grave, there will be no work, or planning, or knowledge, or wisdom. He then goes on and he says, I have observed something else under the sun.
You just went ahead, just got back one. Yeah, no, went back to them.
No.
That's it, now you're up.
Aaron?
He's looking after you.
Yeah. How many times have I messed up so far?
I need that one.
A few times. Ecclesiastes 9, 11 and 12. I have observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race, and the strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes go hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. And those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. It is all decided by chance, by being in the right place at the right time. People can never predict when hard times come. Like fish in a net or birds in a trap, people are caught by sudden tragedy. In chapter 10, he gives some more proverbs that these coffers in this building. In chapter 10, he gives some more proverbs that he thinks are helpful, and then he wraps it all up in chapter 11 and 12 by saying that at the end of the day, whether you're young or old, everything is meaningless. Ecclesiastes 11, 8 to 10. When people live to be very old, let them rejoice in every day of life. But let them also remember there will be many dark days. Everything still to come is meaningless. Young people, it's wonderful to be young. Enjoy every minute of it. Do everything you want to do, take it all in. But remember that you must give an account to God for everything you do, so refuse to worry and keep your body healthy. But remember that youth, with a whole life before you, is meaningless. He spends the final chapter telling us that everything is meaningless, completely meaningless, and then finally he says, we're to fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. Now it's funny, when you get to the end of Ecclesiastes, you're kind of half expecting Solomon to pop out and say, ha, it's all a joke, I was having you on, it's not really as bad as I just made it out to be. But he doesn't. He spent so long building the case that all our pursuits in life are meaningless that he leaves virtually no room to turn the ship around. Or does he? What was Solomon's purpose behind the writing of this book? We'll probably never know the complete reason because he doesn't spell it out and he's not around today to ask that question. But we can find clues in the way it impacts us. As Solomon himself said in verse 11 of chapter 12, the words of the wise are like cattle prods, painful but helpful. Their collected sayings are like a nail-studded stick with which a shepherd drives the sheep. Do you like my picture? It was pretty good, doesn't it? Solomon appears to be saying that what he's written is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, even pained. Why? Because it will then change the direction you're heading. Solomon obviously thinks that left unchecked, we have a tendency to head in the wrong direction. When I was a kid growing up, I used to enjoy watching cowboy and Indian movies. Who ever wants those? Obviously back before the day of online computer games, because they don't watch cowboys and Indians or play cowboys and Indians much now. It's probably not even politically au fait, is it? You know, don't play cowboys and Indians. You'll get hauled over the coals. But invariably in most movies there would be a scene where the young braves would come to the chiefs of their village saying that they needed to go and fight against the white settlers taking their land. And they'd be all angry and the chiefs would always try and get them to settle down, but they'd never listen. Watching the movie, you knew, and I knew, even as a little kid, I knew that things weren't going to turn out well for the young braves. You always expect something's going to go wrong. And yet the young braves were absolutely convinced that they knew better than the older chiefs. You see, it's possible in life to be completely wrong about the direction you're heading in and to be totally unaware that you're wrong. So it's no surprise that when it's pointed out to you, that it causes you a bit of pain and distress. If for a moment you dared believe that everything Solomon said was true, what would that mean about the way you feel about your life, your successes, your failures, your relationships, the progress of others, your priorities, and your future security? If I could use those back, that'd be great. We're going to leave it there this week. Ecclesiastes is one of the most challenging books in the entire Bible, but also one of the most liberating books that you'll ever read. Solomon basically destroys just about every concept we intuitively hold on to about meaning and purpose in life, and he leaves us at a place that is actually incredibly healthy once we get over the shock of having all of our props pulled out from underneath us. Now, why do I say healthy? Well, you'll have to come back next time I preach for the second instalment of my message, but I'll give you a clue. One of the greatest causes of sorrow in a person's life is unfulfilled expectation. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 12 says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life." The most common cause of conflict is someone wants something that they're not getting. None of us are immune to the search for value, worth, and meaning. The question that Ecclesiastes poses, which we all need to answer, is what things do we measure our lives against to determine how meaningful the life we are living is? Now, the next time I preach, I'm going to be showing you the silver lining in Solomon's final words to his generation and all generations following. But I want you to sit with Ecclesiastes over the next 3 weeks and allow it to hit up against your current Christian worldview. As you allow that to happen, note down, write it down, how it makes you feel and the way you want to push back against it. Because as you do, you'll learn things about yourself that will be extremely beneficial for your future growth and the outcome of your life. When you know the truth, Jesus said, only then will you be free. And next week we've got a missions focus. Week after that we've got Frankie preaching, so we've got some good stuff happening. And then I'll be coming back to finish this message off. But can I encourage you? There is an answer. Well, I think there's a really good answer to the question that Solomon poses. Is life truly meaningless? I think there's a great answer. And you don't have to be afraid of Ecclesiastes. It's actually, as I said, it does us a great service because it brings some things out that you probably have been hoping weren't true, but if you really looked at life and the world, you go, well, actually, that is the truth for the majority of people on the planet. But scattered all the way through Solomon's book, there are a whole heap of things that give us hope. give us life. But you can't get there until you've addressed this issue of fairness and justice in the world. So hang in there. Don't get discouraged. God is good. It's okay every now and again to sit with something that's uncomfortable. Because in fact, all of us here have got thinking about certain things that is faulty, is wrong, and needs to change. And we as humans, we hang on to the stuff that we believe over what our eyes might be seeing or what our intelligence might be telling us when we look around the world. And we look at places like India with over 1 billion people living in abject poverty. And we talk about God blessing them and God being, there with them. And isn't it great that the great things are happening, but they're still living in incredible hardship. And we can avoid that because we live here in Australia. But the reality of it is, much of the world is suffering today. And even here in Australia. There are a lot of Christian people, good people, who are suffering. They're suffering in their families, they're suffering in their health. They're suffering because they had great expectations when they were younger and it hasn't come to pass. And now they're questioning whether God's real, whether God cares, whether they can find some meaning in this life that we are living, or is it all meaningless like Solomon seems to be saying? No, it's not. It's not all meaningless. Solomon actually gives us quite a few clues all the way through his book. But he's tackling the world as rawly as he can. And I'd say he's probably coming at it from the perspective of this is what the world is if you were to remove God from the picture and eternity as well. I wasn't going to tell you that this week, but let it, read the book. Can I encourage you, read the book, read through it, and read it with the attitude that what Solomon is saying is true. And if what Solomon is saying is true, what does that mean about some of the beliefs that you have about justice, inequality, and life itself? It will shake you up, it will rattle you. That's good, because we need our thinking shaken up, we need our thinking rattled every now and again if we're to move into more freedom. And that's what this book is all about, taking us from a locked-in, imprisoned worldview to a place where we can be free, totally free, and able to look at the injustices in the world and not get totally overwhelmed and avoid it. To look at the injustices in our own lives and not think that God's abandoned us. Ecclesiastes gives us the tools to be able to do that. So you've got 3 weeks to hang around in Ecclesiastes, and then you'll get the second part of my message, which will bring it all back together for you. Let's pray.